Hey, what's up guys, this is Gary and this is another video in the ESTEST migration series. And in this video I'm going to be showing you how to install the ESTEST server software and get it up and running with the previously installed Apache web server and the ExistDB xquery server and XML database. So if you don't have access to the ESTEST software from the Mercurial revision tracker, which you probably do if you're going through this whole migration process, what you can do is to download the software fresh from our website, and you just go to this URL, estest.ucdavis.edu/download, and you'll need an account to sign on, but once you've validated your registration, you can go ahead and go to browse ESTEST releases, and then you can just choose the latest release version and download these two tar files, and I've already downloaded those. So go to the place you want to install ESTEST, and first we're going to unarchive the source code directory, which is ESTEST dash version number. So you can do that using this command, and this is just the location I've downloaded those tar files. Okay, so we've unpacked the source code for ESTEST. Change directories into that source code and just do an ls. The thing we have to do here is to unpack the third-party sources and libraries directly into this directory. So from this source code directory, execute the command tar-xf, and then with third-party archive. Okay, so once that's done, we're gonna start make install, but before we do that, we need to start the ExistDB server on the local host. So go to where exist was installed and just say startup. Okay, so once that's started, we can say make install. And this is gonna basically go through an interactive installation process with you. So the first thing it asks is for your username for the account at estest.ucdavis.edu, and you should have one if you have downloaded this source. You just use the same account. So I'm going to use this account, and it's going to ask you to authenticate. Okay, so those two steps basically grab some source code for the translators and also the plugins, which we host on an SVN, because those sources are a little bit more fast moving than the main source for ESTEST in terms of when we roll out features and new versions of those sources. So once it's done those two steps, it's going to go into some prerequisite checks. If you pass those, it'll go through to the main installation setup interface, which is what we see now. So you can just fill in some information about your server. If you're doing a migration, just use the information from your old server. But in this case, I'll just give a sort of generic example of what's input. So first it asks for your system administrator email, and then a signature for the email you send from this server. It'll ask you for the domain name of this server, and this is important. You want to use the full domain name, but in this example I'll just use localhost. It'll ask you where ExistDB is installed, so just give the full path to that. It'll ask you for the port for ExistDB. If you didn't change anything, by default it's going to be 8080. It's asking you for a directory to locate or to put temporary user registration files, and the default is suggested. It works okay, so you just hit return. The default permission mask for the server by default is going to be world read, group read write, and then user read write, of course. So now it's going to ask you to initialize ExistDB, so just enter in your administrator password. It's going to ask you to re-index the collection, and this is quite a time-consuming process, but if you're going to do a migration, you want to say yes, but since this is an example, we're just going to go ahead and say no and skip that step. Do you use Apache? Well, we use Apache, so this is going to generate a sort of sample configuration for Apache for us if we say yes. And again, it's just going to ask you for some passwords. This password is the account password sudo for the server you're installing to. And then it asks you again for your ExistDB administrator password. So just pay attention of which password it's asking you to input at that time. And this step is updating some plugins, and it just finishes installing. So the things you want to check really are that it's generated this file, the sample HTTPD configuration file, and also this sample myconfig .py file, which is the sort of main configuration file for the ESTEST server. That file is actually directly copied to the site packages for our local Python libraries and source files. So you can see it here is copied as myconfig.py, and you can actually view this file. It has some sort of generic guessed values for the configuration, which they usually work pretty well. But if you want something specific to your server, you can come back and edit this. And in fact, in later videos, we will be editing this file for some more advanced features of ESTEST. But in any case, the installation is basically done. What we need to do now is to configure Apache to work with this installation of ESTEST. So like I said, we have this sample HTTPD configuration file. Go to where your Apache is installed, or wherever you can find the configuration file for the Apache server, and that's usually located in this conf directory, and copy that file over to here. So we can say copy conf, and we'll call it estest.conf, for instance. Okay, so in the main configuration file, that's httpd.conf, what you want to do is to have the include for estest.conf that we just included. So this is this line here. You just add this line to the bottom of this httpd configuration file. So include conf/estest.conf. Okay, so just quickly, I'll go over some of the contents of the configuration that we've generated here. The first thing we do is to allow proxy requests, because that's how we're going to interface Apache with ExistDB. We're basically making a proxy between those two servers. So when ExistDB is running and Apache is running, Apache can call ExistDB and relay those sort of, the web calls to it. So this is the proxy pass for ExistDB. Note that the port for ExistDB is by default 8080, and using localhost is okay. This line here is convenience for the plugins that we don't need to worry too much about. The first alias is for the main ESTest web files. Notice here that we have a limit on the CGI request body, so all forms in ESTest are limited to 10 megabytes. You can change this limit if you feel that's necessary. We have an alias for the registration module in ESTest, and this is the public registration module that's basically going to allow users to sign up for the ESTest website. We also have an alias for the private registration module, and this line here, allow from localhost, is going to prevent other machines other than the server ESTest is installed to from accessing this directory. We have some administration alias, and this is, for example, to set groups and user groups for that. And again, this is just allowed from localhost. Okay, so that file generally works out of the box, but like I said, again, later we're going to be editing this file for some more advanced features of ESTest. For now, we can just start Apache HTTPD with this configuration file and see what we have for the local host at this stage in the migration. So go ahead and start Apache with this command. And it's started. So we can basically open up localhost and go to the alias /estest, and we see that right here we have the restored version of ESTEST with all the data from the previous server, wherever you got your backup from. One problem with this actually is that there seems to be a bug with the migration, the restoration of data from ESTEST, the existDB of ESTEST of the original server to the localhost server, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So if you sign on here, you can sign on to a previous user account, for instance, one that you have from your original server at estest.ucdavis.edu in this example. And it's going to take a little bit to reload here. You see that these are our permission indicators, and this permission is indicating world read, and this is indicating group access permissions. And you see here that these two have it, well this one doesn't, and then these three have it, well these four don't, and that that kind of looks odd, especially given that they're in the same directory. So if we go back to the same account on our original server, which is at estest.ucdavis.edu, we can confirm that really there's been some kind of error in setting the permissions for these documents during the restore process. You see here that these have permissions and these don't, and then the same here. And I'm not sure why that error is. It seems to be just some kind of bug in existDB, but I'm not exactly sure what that bug is. We've designed a workaround to basically query the original existDB server, say at estest.ucdavis.edu, and then restore the permissions based off of those. I'm going to show you how to run that script now. So the script we use is basically going to be called restorepermissions.py, and we'll ship this with ESTEST in the next release. What you want to do is remember the old file for the backup of existDB is a zip file. What you can actually do is unzip this directly to this directory. So, oops. Okay, so it's going to inflate, and you can examine the contents here. It's going to be pretty obvious how it's backing up and restoring files between the two existDB servers, but it's going to inflate to this root DB directory, and it's going to have all the contents. And these contents files, well, they contain the sort of the structure of the previous server. So how we run this restore permissions file is we're just going to go ahead and go restore permissions, and there's some lengthy output. Then we'll just redirect to log. Oops, it actually does take one argument here, which is the path, the relative path to the unpacked version of existDB. So this directory here, db, is going to take the path, the absolute path or the relative path. It doesn't matter there. So that's the only argument it takes. So we run that, and it's going to ask you for your existDB administrator password to access both the remote and the local instances of the existDB xquery server. And remember that those two passwords should match if you're doing a straight migration. So just enter that here, and then it's just going to take some time to do the restoration. So we can sort of tail the log and see what it's doing. It's just basically taking each file in the directory structure of existDB from the restored contents, querying the original ESTest.ucdavis.edu server, or whatever server it came from, for the permission string, and then resetting those permissions based off of that. So just give it some more time to complete here. And you can see it's doing all these sort of different files. Okay, so it's completed there. So that means it's processed every file in the backup/restore existDB servers. So if we go back to our running localhost here, and we want to compare it again for these permission strings, we can just refresh this page or reload. And again, this might take a little while to restore the view. And we see here that the permissions have been actually reset to their old values that are correct from the original server at estest.ucdavis.edu in this example. So that's going to be it for this video. We've basically shown how to download the ESTEST server software and install it on the local host, and get it working with Apache and ExistDB that we installed previously and migrated some data to. We saw a problem with the permissions that there is a workaround for in terms of the restore permissions script. And in the next videos, we'll show how we configure some more advanced options of our server for hosting ESTEST.